Well, it's time to get underway here. Welcome everybody to the Acronis Career Transition Series virtual event, How to Get Started in Information Security. I'm your host, James R. Slaby. I'm the Director of Cyber Protection at Acronis, and I have just a few housekeeping announcements before we get started. This conference is being recorded, and we'll send you a link to the recording afterwards so that you can review the information you get here today, which is loaded with practical tips, and share with friends who couldn't attend. We hope you do that. Your microphone is muted, so we will not be able to hear you speak, but we do encourage you to submit questions through the Zoom Q&A interface. We have a good chunk of time allocated at the end of the event for questions from the audience with our panelists. If we don't get to your questions, we will follow up with you directly after the event, but hopefully we'll get to most of those in the Q&A. So feel free to submit those questions through the Q&A at any time during the event. So in this event, we've got a couple of very impressive industry leaders here who are going to share their insights on what it takes to get a leg up with your career transformation. I'm going to introduce our second speaker first. I'm sorry. Let me go through our agenda first here before I introduce our speakers. So up first we have Julia Pollack, who's a labor economist at ZipRecruiter, and she's going to give you some great practical tips on how to conduct your career transition plan and stay motivated in the obviously very difficult time that we're all going through here. Stuck in our homes. Again, she has long experience in this field, a great background that I'm going to cover in a second, and that'll be a worthy introduction to kind of broad best practices in planning the next steps in your working life. She'll be followed by my colleague at Acronis, Candid West, who's the Vice President of Cyber Protect Research here at Acronis, and he's going to drill down into some specifics about getting started in a career in info security. That's been my life for the better part of the past few decades, and I can certainly recommend it as a fascinating and rewarding career. Can look a little daunting up front, but Candid's got great advice to help you get started with it. Let me start by giving you a little background on Candid West, who I mentioned is VP for Cyber Protect Research at Acronis. He spends his time researching threat trends and comprehension protection methods here at Acronis. Before he came to Acronis, he worked for more than 16 years as the tech lead for Symantec, one of the big names in cybersecurity, and their global response team. He's published a book, many white papers, and you can find him quoted regularly as a security expert in the tier 1 media publications. You can also find him as a frequent speaker at conferences like the RSA conference and Area 41. He also currently serves as an advisor to the Swiss federal government on cyber risks. So he'll be coming up second. Our first speaker, though, is going to be Julia Pollack. She's the labor economist at ZipRecruiter, which is one of the leading online employment marketplaces that uses artificial intelligence-driven smart matching technology to connect millions of all-size businesses and job seekers. She provides insight and analysis on current labor market trends and the future of work. Prior to working at ZipRecruiter, Julia was an assistant policy analyst at the RAND Corporation and also taught several economics courses as an adjunct faculty member at Pepperdine University. Welcome, Julia, and over to you.
Thank you so much, James. Good morning, everybody. Here on the West Coast, it's early in the morning, and I'm very excited to speak with you about how to find a job in this very, very tough labor market environment. Next slide, please. So we all know that this is just a totally unprecedented crisis, but there are some ways to get ahead and to find a job and to make the most even of a difficult situation. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk briefly about my own background, my own career, my experience of graduating into a recession. Then I'm going to share some trends, some data on what's going on in the labor market and what that means for job seekers. And then I'm going to share some tips for how to find a good job in a tough labor market. Next, please. So I was born and raised in South Africa. My mother, a very hardworking and ambitious woman, sort of encouraged me to reach for the top. So she encouraged me to leave South Africa and apply to universities abroad. I applied to Harvard, sort of early action, got in, and so my whole sort of childhood and the beginning of my career got off to a very auspicious start. Straight A student, great expectations. At Harvard, I really had a fantastic experience, a star-studded lineup of faculty members. My freshman seminar head was the president of the university, Larry Summers, the former head of the US Treasury, the former Treasury Secretary. My thesis advisor was the former chief economist of the International Monetary Fund. So I had wonderful mentors, fantastic professors, and I thought that there was just nothing to stop me from reaching the top. And then I graduated in 2009. Next slide, please. The students who were graduating when I was a freshman gave us some career talks telling us about their career transitions. And what they all told us was that they were taking jobs on Wall Street or in consulting companies, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and companies like that, and that they were going to be paid $60,000 a year straight out of college, and that they were expecting to receive annual bonuses of around $60,000 a year. That had been the trend in the previous 3 years. And so I fully expected to graduate and make $120,000 right out of college. And of course, then 2008, 2009 came. And instead, when I applied for jobs, I heard nothing back, or I got regret to inform you letters. And very quickly, both my husband and I, and he was graduating from Harvard Law School, where they had even greater expectations, where the previous cohorts had all had their law firm jobs, wrapped up by second year of law school. They'd signed their contracts. They were expecting to make, $250,000 a year straight out of law school. We had very, very great expectations for wonderful careers right out the gate. And that didn't happen at all. All of his peers were told by the law firms that they were no longer hiring, that they could keep the jobs that they had been offered, but that they wouldn't be paid for the first 2 years. They could have 2 years off, gap years, and perhaps if the economy recovered, they could return to those positions. So it was a totally different environment. Eventually, I realized that I just would have to take the very first job I was offered if I wanted to stay in the United States. And so I did. I took a job as a policy research assistant that paid, where I was offered $32,000 a year. So almost a quarter of what I'd expected to earn. I have to say, one tip, I did, unlike all of my colleagues in that job, negotiate my salary. So I said, look, living in DC, there's no way that I can earn less than $4,000 a month. Could I, would it be possible for you to, raise that to $40,000 a year? They ended up coming to the middle, to $36,000. So even in a tough labor market, you may still have some leverage. You may still be able to negotiate for a bit more in that salary negotiation. So that's one tip I'd share. We all were complaining about how difficult it was to get by in DC. And so all of the young research assistants ended up figuring out what the others were earning, and no one else had negotiated. And so they were all earning less than me later, which caused some issues. But it did clarify the point that you can't, you don't get unless you ask. So even in a tough environment, have that negotiation. It may be worth it. But it was very tough. My husband and I both took the first jobs that we were offered after very, very lengthy job searches. He took one in Chicago. I took one in DC. We had a long distance relationship. It was extremely stressful. And then my career took a very circuitous path, not the direct path to success that I had been expecting. I ended up joining the U.S. military. It was a perfect, opportunity to do so after my research assistant post, especially where I was surrounded by U.S. military leaders who really impressed me with their knowledge and their practical sort of, know-how and grit. And after I joined the military as a reservist, so I was away for 5 months on active duty training. But I joined as an enlisted person, not as an officer, even though I was a college graduate, because I was not yet a US citizen. And being around sort of the American working class, people who had grown up in poverty in trailer parks, whose parents were in jail, people who'd had much, much tougher backgrounds, I think that helped me develop a sense of acceptance for what had happened and my own career disappointments. It sort of became clear that perhaps those rosy expectations were misplaced, and that actually the real world is a place where there are fat years and lean years, where there are recessions every 10 years. The world wasn't being unfair to me. I'd actually been exceptionally lucky. And we would all get through this. I was surrounded by people who had made very tough decisions and who knew that their life path was either a choice between going to jail or going to the military. And they had chosen to pick themselves up, leave their neighborhoods, break away from the influence of gangs, and become very productive members of society. Started families. And I was just really amazed at the power of people around me to change the course of their lives. And that helped me, I think, overcome the initial disappointment of my own career start. I later went to grad school, got a master's, did a PhD program, and started teaching economics. All of these jobs were fairly low paid. As a grad student, you're making $50,000 a year. So it really took 10 years for me to get to where I had expected to be right out of school. Next slide. But eventually I got there. I found a wonderful, wonderful job, the absolute perfect fit as labor economist at ZipRecruiter, studying the issue that I care about most, employment. Also happens to be based right in my neighborhood. And I found the job at ZipRecruiter, on ZipRecruiter. So I was teaching economics and doing my graduate studies. And I thought, let me look ahead to the future and just see what's out there. And I searched for economics related jobs on ZipRecruiter. And the platform's algorithm suggested all these jobs to me, and the first was the job as labor economist at ZipRecruiter. And I decided, I'm not going to apply now. I want my application materials to be perfect. Let me update my resume. And so I did not apply. Well, that's what I thought. The next day I got a call saying, are you interested in the job? And it turns out that I had applied because it was a one-click apply job. So online employment marketplaces these days make it so easy to apply for jobs that you may apply accidentally without even meaning to. But it was the best accident possible. And I've now been at ZipRecruiter for almost 2 years. And I'm studying the issues that I most care about. And I just, having a completely wonderful time in an innovative, growing company that is solving a really important problem. Next slide. Next slide, please. And now at ZipRecruiter, especially during this crisis, when national labor market data are so delayed, so backward-looking often, and this crisis is moving so quickly, the world is really turning to us for real-time data on the labor market and for expertise and solutions on how to deal with the problem. And it's been a really wonderful opportunity to share our research and data. So let me share a little bit of what we're seeing with you. Next slide. So I'm going to share some ZipRecruiter data on job posting trends. Next slide. Overall, US job openings were moving in the right direction at the start of the year. They were trending upwards nicely until about mid-February. And then the worries about what this coronavirus crisis might look like started to affect hiring. At first, people thought it would just be a supply shock, cause some disruptions to international supply chains, to companies that rely on imported inputs from China. But by around March, it became clear that this would be much, much, much deeper than that, and it would be more of a demand shock and public health problem. And so we saw job postings fall very, very rapidly, and they are now 47% lower than they were in mid-February, and that has huge implications for job seekers. In the last recession, there were 6.6 unemployed Americans for every job opening. But by the end of the expansion, there were 1 million more job openings than unemployed Americans. And what that meant was that most companies said their biggest challenge was filling vacancies and finding candidates. And that tight labor market forced them to make all kinds of changes. It forced employers to expand their talent pools, to get rid of unneeded skills requirements. We saw the share of job postings that required a bachelor's degree or higher fall from 25% to 12% over the course of the recovery. Employers increasingly were prepared to make investments in training people and in offering apprenticeships. And those were all really wonderful changes for job seekers, and especially those with less education and training and experience. Another great outcome of a tight labor market was pressure on companies to raise wages. So we saw wage growth at 3.2% by the end of the recovery, which was exactly in line with what we would expect given how high labor force participation had risen. And the prime age labor force participation, the number of people working and participating in the labor market just kept growing and surprising observers with its ability to keep going up. So job postings have fallen now, and in many ways the tables will be turned on job seekers who will have a tougher time. And the math of the labor market has changed, and that has some implications for job seekers. With fewer overall opportunities around, that means that finding a good match on average will take longer. And so you need to start your job sooner and understand that it may require you to be a more active job seeker and to really monitor the labor market, to jump on job postings as soon as they're posted. And this really is the case across industries. Next slide, please. We've seen the largest decreases in postings in airlines and companies like that related to travel, and in the tourism industry and in hotels. But the job loss, the decline in hiring, or pullback in hiring, is evident even in white-collar industries like the legal field, in business and professional services, in finance and insurance. Some parts of insurance, like auto insurance, are doing very well, but other parts of the insurance industry are also pulling back. The energy industry, of course, has been hit really, really hard. But even the tech industry, which held strong until about the second week of March, has now had a huge decline in job postings as companies have pulled back on advertising spending and found ways to sort of unwind every subscription that they had. Malls and shopping, brick and mortar stores, shops that have seen revenue fall to zero have had to take very drastic measures to cut their costs. And one way they've done that is by cutting off all their subscriptions to software as a service companies. And so tech is now really under strain and is seeing layoffs and also a reduction in new hiring. Next slide, please. And this is the case in every US state, but it's also the case in every country. There's no place to, to escape. In past disasters, like in Hurricane Katrina, one way people recovered from that huge labor market shock was to move to other parts of the country. And now, of course, that's not really an option. The entire world is dealing with this all at once. Next slide, please. At the same time, this crisis has driven surging sales and user growth in some businesses, so grocery stores. In some parts of the country where most food spending was done in restaurants, like in New York City, grocery store purchases have gone up 100%. Pharmacies have seen huge growth in sales. Pharmaceutical companies, as people have had to sort of self-medicate and refer to Dr. Google, warehousing services, delivery driver services, anyone with e-commerce skills, with knowledge of e-commerce software, and how to set up an online store is in very high demand at the moment. We've seen e-commerce specialist jobs, e-commerce advisor jobs go up dramatically. And those are jobs for which you don't necessarily need a degree or certification, but if you study all of these e-commerce platforms and software systems and develop expertise in how to set up an online store, you can find a job in that field. Remote work software companies are seeing a roaring trade. Video game traffic has gone up 75% in rush hours because live sporting events are canceled, movie theaters are closed, malls are closed. So online entertainment at the moment is a huge, has huge opportunities for growth. Home exercise companies, which not just companies that sell home exercise equipment, but that sell subscriptions to online exercise classes, are also seeing massive growth. At-home beauty product producers, meal kit delivery services. So there are places where there are opportunities, and this crisis is really going to accelerate the digital revolution, the move towards online shopping, online employment, online employment platforms, certainly online entertainment, remote work in a big way. And that's going to increase the need for IT professionals and for information security professionals as well. Next slide. And so this shift towards e-commerce and towards learning at home, distance learning, is creating opportunities for jobs, and we're seeing jobs in certain occupations rise dramatically, even as overall postings fall. Next slide. And then outside of the industries that are doing well because of the crisis, there are industries that are doing well despite the crisis, and where there's a strong long-term outlook. The Bureau of Labor Statistics in the US every 2 years does a study, and they project which industries will add the most jobs. And over the next decade, here are 3 types of jobs that are expected to add many more jobs than other industries, that are expected to grow way faster than average. Most of the fastest growing jobs are in healthcare, but outside of healthcare, software developers, information security specialists, and computer use support specialists are seeing employment growth that is really quite impressive. So those are good fields in which to develop skills and expertise. So let's move on to the job tips now. Next slide, please. So my first tip is that when you are searching for a job, you need to become aware of and follow best practices. So if you go to the ZipRecruiter website and you look at COVID-19 resources, we have lots of links there to tips and templates. But we see millions of applications come through our platform all the time. And you'd be surprised at how few job applicants actually do follow these best practices. So the first thing to do is fill out your profile completely and to upload a logical, accurate resume with no spelling errors and grammatical errors. We have 3 templates available for you on our website. Use a generic template because resumes need to be read by computers, especially now when there will perhaps be 8 to 10 million job seekers looking for new jobs around the fall. Employers will be getting so many applications that many of them will be sorted by computers. And if your resume can't be sorted by the computer, you're not even going to be looked at. So make sure you have a generic resume that follows a logical outline. And of course, it needs to have a personalized objective section at the top, but all of the information that's needed on a resume needs to be there. Just follow one of the templates on our website. Make sure that your job seeker profile is complete. So we just did a little experiment and we found that callbacks for candidates are about 10% higher for those who include 2 or more prior job experiences rather than just 1. So many people only list 1 past job, list them all, even if they were college jobs or internships, be as complete and thorough as possible. And then of course, network. And when you do write your cover letter, conduct some research about the employer, tell the employer how you can help them, not how the job will help you and how excited you'd be to have the job. Tell them that you understand their problems and that you can help be part of the solution. And then the last tip is timing. Timing is everything. Sign up for job alerts, for email job alerts, because then you'll be notified when a job is posted that matches your skills and the geographic area in which you are searching. And the reason to do that is so that you can apply quickly. Many employers only look at the applications they receive in the first week or 2. So if your application comes in after that, it won't even get to a hiring manager. So be proactive, monitor job postings, several times a week, and pounce on jobs that look as though you'd be a good fit for them. Next slide. Another thing to do in a tight labor market when employers are no longer so much concerned about finding the quantity of candidates they need and will now have the luxury of being able to focus on quality is to improve your quality as a job candidate. And one way to do that is to take online courses. There are now hundreds of platforms offering online courses. Many of them are very, very cheap. Some are even free. And of course, YouTube has become a wonderful source of online courses as well. Next slide. Here I've just shared a couple of the names of the leading online course providers. But that is one way to improve your resume and make sure that you are the most competitive candidate you can be. And of course, when you choose which courses to study, choose courses in the industries that we know will be growing in the next, over the next decade. So pay attention to the news, pay attention to where the economy is moving, so that you can, prepare yourself and develop skills in an industry with good prospects. Next slide. So online courses are a great way to improve your skills, a great way to improve your experience, especially if you're a young job seeker or someone with limited work experience, is to sign up for freelance work on one of the many freelancing platforms. And that way you can develop a portfolio of work and recommendation letters and have something to show an employer. Next slide, please. Lastly, every online employment marketplace has different features. I know most about the ZipRecruiter one, so I'll just share some tips about ZipRecruiter. We right now have added an actively hiring during COVID banner to jobs where the employer has verified that they are still extending offers. Employers that want to highlight their job as urgent are also able to do so. It's important to be looking at new jobs, jobs that were posted within the last week or two over others. So if you need to strategize your time and you don't have time to apply it to everyone, focus on the newer jobs. And then, if you have a nice thorough profile set up, many jobs allow you to apply with one click without even uploading a new cover letter. Just hit that quick apply button and improve your chances. So my suggestion is, develop nerves of steel. Don't be too disappointed at first if you don't succeed. Try and try again. And know that, yes, while some of you may need to adjust your expectations, as I was forced to, and you may at first, need to take a job outside your most favored industry and area, and you may perhaps need to take a pay cut. The research shows that the effects of a recession on earnings do tend to disappear over, within about 10 years. 10 years is a long time, but it's not that long. Looking back now, I can almost laugh at my somewhat inauspicious start to my career, and it's now given me greater passion for solving problems in the labor market, because I have experienced them personally. So use this as a chance to find problems, to develop solutions, to rethink your career choices. Perhaps the first path that you would have chosen may not have been the best one, and keep applying. Thank you. James, back to you.
Thanks for that fantastic presentation, Julia. I know I've been around long enough myself to live through a couple of downturns in the tech industry, so I certainly empathize with your early struggles and what some of our attendees are undoubtedly going through now. Before we get to our next session, I'd like to remind attendees to please use the Q&A to submit questions. We've got some great ones already, but we'd love to get more. As I said, tech has been up and down over the course of my career, and I'm really glad I got into information security at one point. Have found that fascinating and rewarding, and a lot of opportunity in that space. But from the outside, it can look a little daunting about how to find your way in. Fortunately, we've got my colleague Candid West here today to tell you about what it takes to get into the industry and how to kind of pursue a career there and gradually expand your skills and your opportunities and your earning opportunities over time. Over to you, Candid.
Thank you, James. So we already had a great introduction now from Julia, right? Showing how difficult it is, but also how many kind of opportunities there are. Next slide. And yes, probably have been blessed that I actually have a very nice career and hopefully still will have one in information security. But I wanted to give you some kind of background how I started, and then a few pointers that hopefully give you some silver lining that you can actually use them as well during those tempting times at the moment. Next slide. So for me, I'd say I probably was one of those classical, you could call it geek or nerd. Grew up with two older brothers. They're both, let's say, technically oriented as well. So one studied electrical engineer in the end, the other one computer science. And when I actually kind of grew up, then of course, a lot of it was down to using those technologies, right? And for me, that meant I learned English from a Commodore 64 because I just wanted to be able to actually run those games. And unfortunately, they were all in English, so I had to take the effort, but there was some motivation as well. But then after high school, I actually wasn't too sure what I should do. At the time, I was deciding maybe to study mathematics, maybe physics, or maybe computer science. And in the end, I thought, yeah, computer science probably has some future, so let's do that. And I started to do my master's in computer science at the ETH in Zurich. And of course, I'm glad that I did in the end. while kind of coming to the end of my studies, a friend of mine showed me one of those advertisements for a job at IBM Lab in Zurich as well, and said, hey, look, they're searching for a hacker. So searching for someone that can think outside the box, and that kind of fits for you. And I thought, really? Do you really think I should? So I sent an email, they actually replied. So I had a phone interview. I didn't really take it too serious, but in the end, I actually got the opportunity to start there. And from that on, I was able to kind of gradually, exponentially, even nearly grow my knowledge in the information security end. And then afterwards, I stayed a little bit at IBM, but of course I wanted to do something else, see something from the world. So I applied for a job at Symantec in the US, and I never heard back. So it's as Julia said, you probably have to send a few times. Don't get frustrated if you don't even hear back. I then sent another CV to Symantec in Ireland, in Dublin, and even there, I never heard back. But where I did hear back was actually from Symantec in Germany. And they called me for a job in Switzerland, and that's how I started, and then actually stayed for more than 16 years. So it can sometimes be frustrating, but if you don't give up, you can actually go to the end. And now I'm leading the research team at Acronis. Next slide. Which of course means I have all those nice large screens which can show you kind of what's happening in the world, and a nice good team as well to kind of look into all the threats which are happening. Next slide. But going back to the different jobs in information security. So of course, there are so many different things now that you have to specialize. But that's actually a good thing. I wouldn't take that as a bad thing, because that means there are some new fields opening every time, which means all the others, they have to start learning as well, right? 10 years ago, mobile phones and cloud and IoT devices, that hasn't been so big, right? Now it is the norm. And the same can happen for machine learning, artificial intelligence, self-driving cars. So there's always new fields open, which give you the same chance. So it's not that you actually have to have those 20 years of experience, because quite frankly, for a lot of those fields, there is no one with 20 years of experience. Well, yeah, so back to me, I started as a reverse engineer or threat researcher, analyzing malicious code like viruses, Trojan horses. But of course, there's also a high demand for people working in a security operations center. So those are the people analyzing log files, checking if someone actually attacked this company and if they need to do something against it. There's the other way around. There's penetration testers, the ethical hackers. They try to break in and then generate a nice report telling you how they managed or why they didn't manage to get in. And as you can see, there's many, many other opportunities here. Julia mentioned, for example, e-commerce shop, right? That's high demand at the moment, and they're actually looking even for junior positions because there are not enough people there. Next slide. So, of course, if you look at all those different things, you might get intimidated, right? But you shouldn't be. Yes, it might sound cryptic if I'm talking about SOC and reverse engineering and all those different things. And if you're new to IT and you're just a quote unquote user of the devices, you might say, hey, how should I get into that field? But the important point here is don't be intimidated and don't give up. Next slide. In the end, it's all about the knowledge and the skills that you can acquire and that you can build up. So you do not necessarily need a degree in computer science. You do not need to have been grown up with a Commodore and coding programs for your whole life. You also don't need all those different certificates like CISSP or GSEC. Of course, they might make it easier. For some departments, it might be those keywords that the automated script actually looks for. But for a lot of the others, they are actually checking just if you have basic computer knowledge, right? If you can pick out the difference between an iPhone and an Android phone, then you're already at a good start. If the only thing that you say is not, oh, this one is white and this one is a black phone. It's more about analytic thinking skills, right? Are you a problem solver? Can you think outside the box? Because that's the thing people want. Another thing, which is quite a rare gift as well, is can you talk to the different departments? So very often, they don't need another kernel level driver programmer or coder. They need someone who can actually interact with them, but also interact with the higher management. So kind of translate between the two worlds. Because very often we see that we might have very good engineers or analysts, but they don't even see the, let's say, the same language, or they might not have the same focus. So that can be a bit difficult for sometimes. And of course, yes, you have to have passion, right? Because you will have to learn a lot of things. You will have to be a fast learner as well. But if that is one of your passion, and you can show in the interview that this is something that you're willing to do, then this is a good start for the employer as well. Next slide. So always keep your passion, be curious, and stay curious, right? That's the kind of main attribute to give there. Next slide. So of course, besides sending out your CV, you should also talk to the organizations. A lot of them actually offer internships. They might not be really well paid, but it can give you that experience that others are requiring from you, right? Some have junior positions, especially now during the COVID crisis. A lot of the IT budgets have been cut, or at least reduced. And so a lot of them, they would love to have an experienced analyst with 20 years of experience, but they might not have the budget anymore. So they might actually settle for a junior position, which is your chance, your stepping stone to actually get into it, right? And many of those companies do offer mentoring as well. So when I was building up a team in Ireland, I had many people which I mentored. So you actually hold their hand, show them how it's done, and after 2 or 3 months, they can do whatever they are supposed to do. So for most of the times, there is not an online course which can teach you 100% of all the skills that you need. So there is some training required on the job. And of course, there are some organizations there as well, Perscolas, NPower, Code 2040. So different organizations that can help you get in, help you with the sponsorship as well. Next slide. So another thing, of course, is you should start doing and kind of show that you can do something, right? It's always good to learn things. And as I said, InfoSec, the information security community, is changing a lot of times, right? That means on one hand, it's good because yes, we all start at the same level, right? If something new pops up next year, then we probably all have to start from zero, or at least at the lower end. The bad thing is, that means in 5 years, when you hopefully have one of those jobs, you need to stay active as well, because otherwise someone else will probably try and get your job. So I can only recommend read a lot of those IT news out there. Try to pick one field which you're interested in, being it data analytics, being it writing articles, could also be UI design, user interface. So depending on your own skills, there's a lot of intersections. And the second point is try to create a profile for you online. I know it's difficult to create something if you don't really have anything to show, but maybe you can just follow up with a blog or just Twitter. I mean, just retweeting, asking the right question can already be good enough, right? I mean, just remember there are people which are famous just for cat videos on YouTube. So it doesn't always take a unique skill to actually get some exposure. Next slide. So Julia already mentioned there's a lot of online classes that you can take at the moment. Many of them are free. Unfortunately, if you want a certificate, you have to pay for most of them, which might be $50. Some of them are a few hundred, but it's definitely a good start to check out if it is actually something for you, right? Maybe you say, I do not want to be a penetration tester or a SOC analyst, but how would you know? Check it out, do some of those trainings, and then maybe you find out which niche is perfect for you. And currently during the COVID-19 times, a lot of those pages actually offer some free training, have reduced course fees. So now is the best time to use that. Specifically if you're at home because you have been unemployed at the moment or on short work, or you are not allowed to work and therefore have enough time. So maybe instead of watching the next series on Netflix, go and actually do something for your career. Next slide. So as I already mentioned, also stay online or up to date with all the different things which are going on. So there's websites which have news, easy to read. You don't need to have a computer science degree. There's a few podcasts if you're more on the listening side. Maybe take it outside to the sun on your veranda or balcony and try and listen to some of those stories. There's also a lot of videos, free security videos, or from conferences like RSA conference, DEF CON, or Hack in the Box. Most of them offer the talks for free. So you can go online and watch all those other people talking about some specific subjects. And of course, you can follow on Twitter. There's many, many good security researchers there. Feel free to follow me as well, of course. My handle is mylaokoon. But there's a few good ones which always can point you the right direction of new things which are popping up. Next slide. So lastly, of course, it would be nice to meet up with people. Julia mentioned it's all about networking, right? It's a bit difficult at the moment, I agree. I would love to go to those local meetups and talk with the people, which unfortunately at the moment is just not possible. And of course, depending on where you are, you should not do it because it's not allowed. But a lot of them do offer some virtual meetups at the moment. So check out maybe on Eventbrite or other meetups websites. There's B-Sides. B-Sides is a grassroots initiative for free conferences around the world. So me with a few friends are running B-Side Zurich in Switzerland, for example, but many big cities have some, and a lot of them have moved to virtual conferences at the moment. So that's one good thing. There's of course also LinkedIn groups, which you can attend to and kind of get some exposure, see what's going on. If you already have some skills and just want to train it, then there's Capture the Flag games. So many kind of pretended network that you can attack or puzzles to solve, like analyzing some malware or reverse engineer some network traffic, analyzing log files. So these things, they do exist. And it's a great way of showing that you have experience or gained experience as well. And then there's bug bounties, probably the next step as well. So you can attack real companies for actually for money and for real. They allow you to attack some specific networks. They usually define what. And if you find something, they will either give you a t-shirt or up to a few thousand or even $10,000, depending on how successful and how severe the bug was. And of course, should also mention, as they're underrepresented, unfortunately still, there's a lot of communities for women in IT. So reach out to those as well and kind of get connected, get into it, because as James said, it's a very exciting world out there in the IT security space. And even though due to the pandemic, there's still going to be enough people searching for IT people. So I can only recommend doing it. Next slide. And back to you, James.
Thanks so much for that, Candid. Great practical tips. Certainly communicating a sense of the data that we have often shared with our partners. I regularly do webinars for our service provider partners. And a frequently quoted statistic from before the pandemic was 3.5 million unfilled positions worldwide in the information security space. I imagine that shrunk a little bit in the wake of the pandemic, but still obviously enormous opportunity, way more positions than there is talent to fill them. I know I encourage my young relatives who are in school, about to graduate, or just out on the job market now, that this is a career with incredible promise and a lot of opportunity if you've got the mindset and the stick-to-itiveness. I also want to thank you for telling that Commodore 64 story. I'm glad to know I'm not the only one that tells Grandpa Simpson stories for younger colleagues. So if you Candida and Julia, if you can turn your cameras and your microphones back on. We've got a bunch of great questions from the audience, and we've got a good 9 minutes or so left. We might run a little long if we keep going here. But let me start with a question for Julia. Should I start applying for jobs now, or should I wait until my unemployment benefits expire?
You should start right away, and there are two reasons. One, when there are fewer opportunities overall, it can take longer to find a good match, so that's one reason to start soon. The other is that how lucky you are in the job market really depends on how many other candidates there are and how many, how good those candidates are. Right now, job seeker activity is actually quite muted, and so as far when we look at the numbers of applications per jobs, it's actually pretty low right now. The conditions are quite favorable for job seekers. Just right now, when we're in the crisis and lockdowns mean that schools are closed and many people can't work because they have to stay home and look after children. But that is going to change very, very quickly. Already we're starting to see an uptick. And so if you can get in early, now's the time to do it.
Thank you for that. Candida, I think this is one that's aimed at you. Is it worth doing a certification in InfoSec disciplines, or should I wait and do it on the job?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, depending on the certificate, like a CISSP or similar, they might cost you a few $1,000s to get through if you do a, let's say, a 5-day boot camp with the whole class. So sometimes they are actually offered by the companies. So I would definitely ask them, hey, can you offer me maybe 50-50, or maybe they even pay all of it? So do this during the interview. That's definitely good. We had lots of people doing it that way. On the other hand, if you want to kind of stand out now, I'd say probably go for some which are the cheaper ones, just to show that you are interested in kind of have the experience. But usually it doesn't really make sense to spend $10,000 if you can afford it anyway, to get certificates on your own, because they're not making too much difference compared to the other experience that you might have.
Thanks for that. I'm going to try to interpret this one as best I can here. And Julia, I know this is one for you, and I think Candid might have a comment on it. Are the exponential curve projections for job opportunities in cybersecurity projected to shift to lesser demand from current projections or those made 5 years ago, and looking forward over 3 to 15 years? That definitely sounds like a question for a labor economist.
I would say on the contrary. So there might be a temporary lull, but this crisis has really accelerated the digital revolution. It has accelerated the shift from brick and mortar stores to e-commerce, the adoption of remote work, the adoption of all kinds of new technologies that companies were perhaps reluctant to adopt. So much onboarding and interviewing is now going to be done online. All of those systems will need to be maintained, improved, and secured. And so I see demand actually increasing, not decreasing as a result of this crisis.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
I would agree. I mean, it's probably just going to be a shift in some of the things, right? As we said, more e-commerce, more online services. A lot of the companies now, they try to kind of maximize what they can do with their small budget, which often means automation or services, which just means the job going to be moving to a different direction. But I definitely say there's still a huge demand, yeah.
One point, so many people have been applying for unemployment insurance benefits, and businesses have been applying for loans. And what we found is that many banks' websites and government websites are just not up to the task. Those websites have been crashing. Many of them are coded in COBOL. There's been huge demand for COBOL programmers, for people who have old understanding of old ways of doing things and old platforms and technologies. So we've now realized what a huge problem that is. And I think there's going to be a massive push to modernize and improve and expand and update government and banking technology platforms. And there you'll find lots of job opportunities as well in the coming months and years.
Wow, COBOL, that was an antique even when I started. This is a good one. I imagine both of you have some insight on this. I will refrain from commenting on it. Looking back, is there anything you wish you had done differently on your career path besides buying Apple before it issued the iPod?
Well, definitely, there's, I mean, always something you would have changed, right? But I have to say I'm quite pleased with how I did the things, and probably also quite lucky in getting some of it. So of course, yes, if you would already know that you don't have to apply to those 100 jobs, just go to the right one that you got in the end. Question is, would you have gotten it if you don't apply to the others, right? So now I'm actually happy with what happens. Yeah, and you know, all those shares, they don't really help you too much now as well, the same as with toilet paper. So fine on my side.
I think my advice to my younger self would have been not to get so discouraged during the Great Recession. Looking back, I didn't apply to that many jobs. It was more, you know, I sent out 4 applications and waited and waited and waited and heard nothing back and got very depressed. At the time, of course, the kinds of online employment marketplaces that we have now didn't exist yet. You know, ZipRecruiter was started in 2010. So I was looking at the college career services website, which mostly had jobs in Boston where I didn't want to work. And so I think I had a very unsophisticated job search process that really hurt me. And, you know, now, although it might be difficult to find a job, it's also easier than ever before to find a job. You can, you know, they're aggregated all over the place in these wonderful websites. It's easy to apply once you've created a profile. And so, you know, I would encourage people to, you know, use those resources and use them well and learn how to do it properly. You know, have friends look at your resume and make sure that it doesn't have errors. And, you know, just look widely, sign up on every website, be an active, proactive, creative job seeker.
Fantastic. This is a good one, one that I worried about a few years ago. How can I build an online presence for myself if I don't have anything to show?
Yeah, as I said, I mean, you don't necessarily have to do cat videos, but there are a lot of opportunities. I mean, even on the IT side, joke aside, we've seen many YouTube channels where people just talk about their experience when they're installing products and kind of tell, hey, look, took me 5 minutes to find out which settings I have to change or how to find that button. So that could be something which other people might be inspired by, or kind of try to get a blog up where you talk about any of the news happening at the moment, right? So there's always something you can share from your perspective, or just get involved in some of the projects which are going on. I mean, it don't have to be a kind of one-man project, right? You can join a community and then help there, like I said, B-sites and other conferences. They are always happy to have people that can help them staff, help them with registration and so on. And that can be your foot into building your online presence.
I'm going to keep going if you've got a couple of minutes to stay, because we've got some great questions here. One is, how can I be sure that the jobs I'm seeing advertised online still exist?
Well, you know, many of the internships that were posted at the end of last year or in January or February do not exist anymore. They have been, you know, canceled, put on hold, and that's true of many jobs as well. And that's why it's useful to use something like ZipRecruiter. You know, we have created that actively hiring during COVID banner, and we ask employers to verify, you know, whether they are still extending offers. And the other thing to do is just to look at job postings by date. So if you are restricting your search to jobs that were added after, you know, mid-March, after all that we know about this crisis, you can be pretty sure that those employers are still hiring. And then look at the language used in the job postings. If the employer says, you know, urgent, immediate start, those are really good terms to look for, because they can help you find jobs where you'll be hired quickly. You know, there's nothing more frustrating than applying for a job and then going through 3 rounds of interviews that take weeks and weeks and weeks and taking forever to hear back. if an employer says urgent, immediate start, someone wanted right away, you can be a little more confident that they will, they'll move things along quickly.
All right, let me go with one last question here before we wrap up. I'm going to have to infer some words into this question here. I have my degree or studies in artificial intelligence and would like some guidance on how to integrate the same with cybersecurity. How do you see the future of AI and cybersecurity? Candid, I know you've got some energy on that one.
Absolutely. I mean, artificial intelligence is a very strong field at the moment everywhere, but specifically also in cybersecurity, because we're just kind of seeing such a high frequency of attack that it's a flood that you simply cannot handle manually, right? Analyzing those log files, analyzing those viruses and so on. So there's a lot of automation being built in, but unfortunately, automation is difficult unless you have someone who's smart and clever to do it and who would be smarter than a machine, right? So a lot of artificial intelligence is at the moment used to kind of figure out how can we boost up the protection level of your devices, of your environment, of all the workloads. And that's something which is highly active researched at the moment. So that will be something where you can get started. There's smaller fields as well, of course, down to using artificial intelligence to analyze log files or analyze any voice patterns, right? Kind of a voice authentication, for example, or even down to recognizing those deep fake videos or images, right? Could they be automatically detected? There's kind of the battle going on at the moment by machines producing those fake pictures and other machines detecting them. So there's various fields, depending, therefore, where you did your degree, as in more on the imaging side or text side or log analyzation side, then just, I'd say, Google it. There will be tons of hits on the first page telling you which fields are actually kind of intersecting with you.
Thank you, Candid. I'm sorry to the audience. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for questions today. I know we got a ton of great questions that we did not get to. We promise we will follow up with you directly with answers to that. I expect we'll share those when we share the link to the recording here. So I want to thank my speakers again, Julia Pollack and Candid West, for their terrific presentations. I'll also point you to this web link to a resource page that Acronis has put up with links to a broad variety of news and analysis and other resources to help you and businesses get through the pandemic. I'd also encourage you to check out the Acronis blog. People like Candid and I regularly contribute essays there that offer timely perspectives on recent cybersecurity news events and other pressing topics. We've also got a resource center there with a lot of free resources for you to read up and improve your knowledge and ability to talk intelligently about cybersecurity and data protection products. That's Acronis's technology field. If you have any spare nickels, we'd encourage you to donate them to the Acronis Cyber Foundation. Our emergency relief fund helps build schools in developing countries around the world. We actually send Acronis employees out on their own time to actually physically build schools. So that's a brilliant effort where we've got a big commitment to education around the world, and it's reflected there. With that, I will say thank you, everybody, so much for taking the time today. Be safe, be well, and keep your spirits up in this difficult time, and consider what we've told you about information security. We're real believers in the promise of it, and I hope you find it there too. Good afternoon and good day, everyone. We hope to see you again soon.